The more I look around, the more it seems that internet videos about video games or anything else are besieged by cynicism and negativity. From angry video game nerd to zero punctuation, snark and bile are all the rage.
So this is the game. You just look at it and it sucks. It doesn't come as a surprise. It's not like there's any expectations to meet. It's not Spider-Man or Batman or something cool. It's a fucking fairy tale. So it doesn't even need to try to be bad.
I can still remember a time when replacing letters with numbers in written English was a practice associated only with douchebags, and people pretending to be douchebags ironically, so basically, yeah, just douchebags.
Heck, my Half-Life video caught justified flack for choosing to focus on issues that are a little nitpicky in the grand scheme of things. I mean, Half-Life is a good game. I said so myself in the video. Why did I need to spend 14 minutes tearing apart tiny little details? The reason for all of this negativity is that, well, it's easy to rip into something. And I don't just mean crass cynicism is emotionally safer and easier than opening up and finding joy in something. I mean, it's simply easier to write interesting, funny, or insightful commentary on things that have gone wrong. Talking about why an idea didn't work provides natural opportunities for humor, sure, but it also leads to discussions about tantalizing possibilities on how to make it work, how to take an idea, separate the wheat from the chaff, and improve it. Deconstructing a work down to its base components and finding the flaws helps us better understand the medium and how to apply it. Applauding something, on the other hand, tends to come off as just giving a game a gold star for being so awesome at best, and adding to a big circle jerk of hype and media frenzy at worst. If you sing the praises of a wildly popular game, you're a sellout with no taste. If you cheer on lesser-known titles, you're accused of being pretentious. In short, it's safer, easier, and more entertaining to be harshly critical of your subject matter, and that's why that's all you ever see on the internet. And while it may backfire horribly, I'm going to take that as a challenge. I'm going to do a video for a game I really, really like and see if I can't provide something entertaining, thoughtful, and informative without focusing on petty criticisms. With that in mind, let's take a look at Bastion. Bastion, made by newcomer Supergiant Games and published by WB Interactive, is an isometric shooter. It's got some superficial resemblance to Diablo in that the bulk of the gameplay is killing things and leveling up, but it's no loot game. In fact, outside of its core killing things gameplay, it's hard to describe the mechanics that make up the game. Most missions find you retrieving a crystal that you can use to improve the Bastion, which is the last refuge and hope for civilization, but more on that later. As you progress, you'll gain new weapons, and I don't just mean more efficient means of killing dudes, I mean fundamentally new weapons. You start with a mallet that functions largely like a Diablo Morningstar, but are quickly introduced to a gun that fires rapidly, but only when you're not moving, a fast-cutting sword that can also be thrown, a shotgun that's powerful at short range but quickly becomes less effective in longer ranges, and a bow and arrow that takes time to aim but you can move while aiming. And there are a ton more, each with their own firing mechanics, stats, and rules. You won't find a machine gun and then a better machine gun here. Each weapon has a unique gameplay style attached to it, and new weapons are introduced regularly, up to and including the last level of the game. In fact, the pacing and length is something this game just nails. Sticking to the main quest, it can be played through in as little as 5 hours, with every level giving you a new weapon, bastion upgrade, or slice of the narrative. The main game has very little fat. It stays just long enough to introduce all of its mechanics and tell its story, then politely ends. I'd put it up there with Braid and Portal in terms of games that are perfectly paced and last just long enough to get their point across. There are far too many games out there that are bloated with filler content. Some games naturally lend themselves to potentially long, expansive games, like Civilization. Other games, especially multiplayer games, can offer you anything from 2 hours to 200 hours depending on how much you like the core mechanics. But when you're talking about mostly linear, narrative-driven experiences, there's no reason Gears of War, with its Saturday morning cartoon-quality story and exceedingly simple mechanics, needs to last 8 hours. Portal 2 took 3 times as long as Portal to complete, but it didn't really improve the quality of the game threefold. Over the past 20 years, the average age of people who play games has gone up. Right now, it's about 37, according to the ESRB. People at that age have kids and careers, houses and spouses. They don't necessarily have time for a 20-hour escapist fantasy about shooting bad guys in the face. But the industry hasn't really changed its development practices. They still make games as if the target audience has all of summer vacation to finish their epic zombie shooter. And as a result, most people just don't finish games. Gamers constantly complain about their backlogs on internet forums, and just about everyone watching this probably has started a game this year without finishing it. The problem has actually gotten so bad and so prevalent that CNN, of all places, actually had an article on the subject. So when games like Braid, Portal, or Bastion come along and offer a shining example of delicately balanced length and content, I think it's important to point that out. I, and most other adults with jobs and responsibilities, would much prefer to spend $15 on a game that gives me 4 to 5 hours of actual content, rather than $60 on a game that has that same 5 hours of content spread out over 20 hours of gameplay. On the other hand, Supergiant is fully aware of the protestations of hardcore gamers who always clamor for more. So, if you really want to sink your teeth into the gameplay, there's challenge levels for each of the weapons, idols you can activate that give additional powers to enemies but grant additional experience for killing them, and a New Game Plus option to run through the game all over again in order to collect everything. If you really want it to, the game can run upwards of 12 hours to complete with max levels and max weapons. And in a way, it makes Bastion a better example of a well-paced game than Braid or Portal. The core game lasts just as long as it needs to, but there's enough additional depth and content there to appease gamers that want more game for their dollar. Matters of length and pacing aside, the game features some astounding production values. I mean, look at this game! It's gorgeous! At a time when the defining mainstream aesthetic is a drab, desaturated, monochromatic urban military shtick, and when the default indie aesthetic is an intentionally lo-fi affair, here is a game that provides painted graphics and lush, gorgeous color with a twangy acoustic soundtrack. Now, granted, this isn't exactly the first indie game to try that particular aesthetic. But it definitely works here. I mean, yeah, some environments are so noisy it's hard to tell if you can walk on some objects, and the isometric perspective made some of the mild platforming at the very end of the game kind of frustrating. But most of the time it just serves to reinforce the game's tone, letting you see and hear the beauty that Caelondia once held, while also seeing the degree of devastation and sorrow caused by the calamity.
He sees what's left of the rippling walls, years of work undone in an instant, in the calamity.
Speaking of which, I suppose I should get around to commenting on the game's story. The game starts with you awaking in your bed just after the calamity, an apocalyptic event that wiped out your civilization and home city of Caelondia, turned most people to ash, and destroyed almost all solid ground. Apparently this potentiality was not unforeseen, because the citizens of Caelondia had engineered an emergency refuge for society in the event of an apocalypse.
The Bastion, where everyone agreed to go in case of trouble.
There you meet Rux, who provides not only all of the exposition to the game, but also the game's most memorable gimmick, a never-ending narration of everything you're doing.
Know what smells worse than an ankle gator's breath? A stinkweed. Ain't time for pecker hunting, but the kid can't resist. Can't fight Queen Anne without the proper tools. The brushers use their pikes to keep their distance around here.
Now, I don't know if it's the smooth, cool tone of his voice, the way his dialogue is written to be wistful yet informative, or the fact that the universe is just so interesting that I want all of the exposition I can get. But somehow, it works. It never gets old throughout the entire game. Anyways, the two of you set about completing the Bastion by collecting crystals to fuel its engines. You soon find two survivors, Zia and Zulf. Both of them are Ura, a strange, black-haired mountain folk who live to the east, underground, in the mountains. It's not really clear, but the point is that the Ura and the citizens of Caelondia have a history of conflict. Zia becomes fast friends with both Rux and the player, but Zulf mostly stays to himself, absorbed in a journal written by Zia's dad. Over the course of the game, it's unveiled that the calamity was caused by a Caelondian weapon designed to kill the Ura once and for all. Since Zia's dad was himself an Ura and in charge of the weapon project, yeah, that was probably a security oversight on the part of the Caelondian military. He retargets the weapon to Caelondia itself, causing the calamity. Once Zulf reads this in the journal, he kinda goes apeshit and tears up the Bastion before you complete it. As you attempt to repair it, Rux reveals the true power of the Bastion. It can be used to blast away, never to return. But it can also be used to reset the universe to a time before the calamity.
Things will go back to the way they used to be. That's the power of the Bastion. This whole place is a living record of the times before the calamity. The way things were before this story. Good times, right?
Ultimately, it's up to the player to deal with Zulf, fix the Bastion, and decide whether they'd like to drift off to another land or reset time itself. The story in and of itself isn't that interesting. It's a post-apocalypse story, and those are a dime a dozen in this medium. But what sets it apart is that the apocalypse in this game actually means something. Where Rage, Borderlands, and Fallout are content to simply set their game in a post-apocalyptic wasteland because, hey, it's cool, Bastion's calamity serves as a thematic focal point. The game is largely about dealing with a catastrophic loss. Every character in the story basically lost everything when the calamity hit, and they're stuck just trying to figure out how to move on. The tiles popping up underneath the character's feet isn't just a cool effect. Well, okay, it is. But it's also a visual metaphor for his trying to piece his life back together, to get his bearings, to find a stable footing in life. More than just a visual metaphor, however, it's also a ludic one. Since the floor doesn't appear until you step on it, the player, much like the kid, is uncertain about where to go next, what the proper path is, or how to get themselves out of the situation they found themselves in. The city of Caelondia itself serves as a metaphor for the emotional loss. The entire game, Rux laments the loss of beauty that Caelondia once held, and given how gorgeous the game already is, it must have been truly a sight to behold.
The city was the most beautiful place in the world. We all knew that.
I mean, if this is their version of a shattered wasteland, imagine how amazing things must have been before it all exploded. And while it's pretty obvious that the game is about dealing with regret and life-changing loss in a general sense, I'd argue that the game's actually about a person working through a particularly devastating breakup. The indications of this are admittedly subtle, but they're present and recurring enough that I don't think they can be ignored.
Of all the plans to survive the calamity, it had to be stab weeds. Blasted things hurt like a broken heart.
For example, one of the first items you find in the game that isn't a weapon is a small bracelet. Rux mentions its significance briefly when you pick it up.
Kid finds a memento from a girl he knew. Always used to fancy her.
And when you first meet Rux at the Bastion, he has this to say about it.
I tried to let the kid down gently. This is the Bastion, all right. Except no one else showed up.
So this game, about a literally earth-shattering, world-ending cataclysm, starts with you having lost your girl. Not your parents, not your kids, not your dog, not your bestie, just your girl. That's not a coincidence. The statues of frozen ash left by people who died in the calamity also reflect this reading.
Kid sees it plain, frozen faces all around.
Unless you and your significant other were serious homebodies, breakups, especially bad breakups, mean splitting up friends. People who were a part of your life simply stopped being there after this tumultuous event. They didn't do anything wrong, really, but they're gone just the same. These aren't random civilian corpses. Rux knows them by name and points them out to you as you encounter them. Some you might have liked.
The Thunder brothers didn't make it. They never saw what it was like beyond the walls. Nor did the bird boy. Didn't make it.
Others you might not have liked.
Odd place to find the likes of Percy the Snitch. Never much cared for that big wide grin of his.
But they're all gone just the same. There's also a dream sequence about halfway through the game that seems to imply that the kid harbors guilt, self-loathing, and self-doubt, culminating in a battle with himself. Yeah, Zelda and other games have done this before, but context matters. And in this context, it reflects a sense of responsibility for what happened. In the literal narrative, the calamity was caused by a bunch of scientists and politics. The kid had no reason to feel responsible. But if we're reading this game as an allegory for a man dealing with a breakup, it makes sense. There's always that point after the end of a meaningful relationship where you start to wonder how many of the problems were really your fault, and how much blame you actually carry. Thinking about the game this way even recontextualizes the player's final choice. You can move on, forging ahead with this new direction in life. Caelondia, your relationship, may be lost, but there are other peoples and other lands waiting to be met, and unknown adventures yet to be born.
Any moment I'd want to live again happened after the calamity, not before.
Or you can reset the timeline and chase a dream that seems destined to end no matter what. And whether that means chasing a relationship after it's no longer an option.
Stacy, we broke up 2 months ago.
Well, that doesn't mean we can't still go out.
Well, it does, actually. That's what breaking up is.
Or getting back with a partner you know is no good for you.
I can't see anything that I don't like about you.
But you
Right
will.
now, I can't.
But you will. You know, you will think of things. And I'll get bored with you and feel trapped because that's what happens with me.
Okay.
Okay.
So you're probably wondering if the calamity happened already. What's to stop it from happening again after the Bastion does its thing? The answer is... I don't know.
The possibility of rekindling that connection is too much to resist. So you go back, hoping to catch even a fleeting moment where your heart doesn't have this giant hole in it. And the game makes a strong argument for why you would choose such an option. Rux spends the entire game building up Caelondia as a gorgeous, cultured, wondrous place. It was beautiful to him, and having never seen it with our own eyes, it was beautiful to us. By asking the player to choose between the beauty we only managed to catch glimpses of versus a vague and unknown future, the game provides an unexpected emotional conflict. We want to see Caelondia live again, but we recognize the unlikelihood that we could do anything to prevent its destruction.
Caelondia, we're coming home.
It's a binary choice that has more meaning and more substance than any moral choice system that has ever been introduced in any other game ever. Bastion ends without making judgment one way or the other, and the ambiguity works to its benefit. It doesn't presuppose that moving on is necessarily the best thing, but it does convey the potential dangers and futility of chasing dreams into the past.
So long, kid. Maybe I'll see it in the next one.
Now, granted, that's just a single reading that has its roots in traditional narrative-biased methodology. I'm pretty sure if you read the game using techniques laid out in, say, Ian Bogust's unit operations, you'd have a vastly different takeaway. But just to have a game out there that supports any sort of reading is refreshing and valuable, and the world is better for the game. So that's my attempt to be positive. Did it suck? Is Insight better than Bile? Is my junior high level literary analysis ridiculous? Let me know in the comments and on Twitter. Till next time.